The small-town bank was busy as usual, customers shuffling in and out, tellers typing away, and the faint hum of chatter filling the air. In one corner, an elderly woman stood patiently in line, clutching her worn-out purse. Her hands trembled slightly as she waited, her eyes scanning the room with quiet patience. She was dressed simply, a faded floral dress and a shawl draped over her shoulders. To anyone passing by, she looked like just another ordinary customer. When her turn finally came, she stepped up to the counter with a polite smile. The young teller behind the glass barely glanced at her before turning back to his computer. Without looking up, he muttered, "Next." The old woman placed a small stack of cash on the counter. "I'd like to deposit this, please," she said softly. The teller, a man in his late 20s with slicked back hair and an air of impatience, finally looked at her. His eyes flicked over the money, then back at her. "This all?" he asked, his tone dripping with disinterest. She nodded. "Yes, please." He sighed loudly, as if counting her few bills was the biggest inconvenience of his day. Snatching the money, he began flipping through it with exaggerated slowness. A few people in line behind her shifted uncomfortably, sensing the unnecessary rudeness. Then, the teller did something shocking. He held up one of the bills to the light, squinting at it like he suspected it was fake. "Where'd you get this?" he asked, his voice laced with suspicion. The old woman blinked in surprise. "From my pension," she answered honestly. The teller smirked, exchanging a look with his colleague. "You sure about that? These don't look fresh." A murmur rippled through the line. The woman's face fell, her cheeks flushing with embarrassment. She had never been treated like this before. I saved it from last month's payment," she explained, her voice wavering. The teller shrugged, tossing the money into the drawer with little care. "Whatever. Just make sure it's real next time." The woman's hands shook as she accepted her deposit slip. She opened her mouth to say something, then closed it, deciding it wasn't worth the trouble. With a quiet sigh, she turned and walked away, her head slightly lowered. What the teller didn't know, what none of them knew, was that this sweet, soft-spoken woman was far more important than they realized. Because her son owned the bank. And he was about to find out exactly how his employees treated customers when he wasn't around. The next morning, a well-dressed man in his late 30s walked into the same bank. He wore a simple button-up shirt and dark trousers, nothing flashy, nothing that would draw too much attention. His hair was neatly combed, and his sharp eyes scanned the room with quiet intensity. No one recognized him. And that was exactly how he wanted it. The man, the real owner of the bank, had heard whispers about how customers were sometimes treated when management wasn't around. But he needed to see it for himself. So today, he wasn't the boss. Today, he was just another customer. He took his place in line, keeping his expression neutral. A few people ahead of him, an older man struggled to fill out a form, his hands shaking. The same rude teller from yesterday, the one who had mocked the elderly woman, let out an annoyed sigh. "Sir, you're holding up the line," the teller snapped. "If you can't fill it out properly, step aside." The old man looked embarrassed. I'm sorry, my eyes aren't so good anymore." The teller rolled his eyes and snatched the form away. "Just sign here. Hurry up." The bank owner's jaw tightened, but he stayed silent. This is how they treat people. When it was finally his turn, he stepped forward, sliding a check across the counter. "I'd like to cash this, please." The teller barely glanced at him before picking up the check. Then, his eyebrows shot up. The amount was large, much larger than usual. Suddenly, his attitude changed. "Ah, yes, sir," he said, his voice suddenly warm and professional. "Right away, sir. Would you like any assistance with investments? We have excellent options for high-value clients like yourself." The bank owner kept his face blank. "No, thank you. just the cash. The teller practically tripped over himself to help, counting out the money with exaggerated care. Of course, sir. Anything else I can do for you? Maybe a premium account? Free services? The man took the money, slipping it into his pocket without a word. As he turned to leave, he caught sight of something that made his blood boil. Near the entrance, the same elderly woman from yesterday, his mother, had returned. She was speaking softly to a security guard, asking for help with the ATM. The guard waved her off impatiently. "Ma'am, if you can't use it, come back when it's less busy," the guard said, turning away. The bank owner's hands clenched into fists. He had seen enough. The bank owner stood frozen near the exit, watching as his mother, the woman who had worked tirelessly her whole life to give him opportunities, was brushed aside like she didn't matter. His chest burned with a quiet fury, but he forced himself to stay calm. He needed to see everything before he acted. His mother hesitated near the ATM, her fingers hovering uncertainly over the buttons. She glanced around, hoping someone might help, but the security guard had already walked off, and the other customers were too busy with their own transactions. Swallowing his anger, the bank owner walked over. "Need some help?" he asked gently, keeping his voice low so no one would recognize him. His mother turned, relief washing over her face. "Oh, yes, please. These machines always confuse me," she admitted with a small, embarrassed laugh. He guided her through the process, his hands steady as he punched in the numbers for her. As the machine whirred and dispensed cash, she smiled up at him. "Thank you, Beta. You're very kind." Beta. The word, so simple, so affectionate, nearly broke his composure. How many times had she called him that while raising him? How many sacrifices had she made so he could one day stand where he was now? And this was how her kindness was repaid? He forced a smile. "Of course. Happy to help." Just then, a loud, mocking laugh cut through the air. The rude teller from earlier was leaning against his counter, smirking as he watched them. "Oh, look, the old lady found a helper. Maybe next time bring someone who knows what they're doing before coming to the bank, huh?" The bank owner's entire body went rigid. His mother's face fell, her shoulders hunching slightly like she wanted to disappear. That was it. No more waiting. He turned slowly toward the teller, his voice dangerously calm. "What did you just say?" The teller shrugged, not sensing the storm brewing. "Just saying, if she can't handle basic banking, maybe she shouldn't be here. We're not a charity." A hush fell over the nearby customers. Even the other employees paused, sensing something was about to happen. The bank owner took a step forward. Then another. Until he was right in front of the counter, staring the teller dead in the eye. "You're right," he said, his voice low and steady. "This isn't a charity. It's a business. And in my business, customers, especially elders, are treated with respect." The teller blinked. "Your business?" Behind him, the bank manager, who had been in his office, suddenly rushed out, his face pale. "Sir! I didn't know you were coming in today." The teller's smirk vanished. "Sir?" The bank owner didn't break eye contact. "That's right. I own this bank. And you," he glanced around at the other employees, who were now staring in horror. "All of you, just showed me exactly how you treat people when you think no one's watching." Silence. His mother's eyes widened in realization. She hadn't told anyone about her son's position, never wanting special treatment. But now, as the truth settled over the room, the air thickened with tension. The teller's mouth opened, then closed. No clever comeback. No smirk. Just fear. The bank owner turned to the manager. "Call a staff meeting. Now." The bank staff filed into the conference room like prisoners walking to the gallows. The rude teller kept wiping his sweaty palms on his pants. The security guard who'd ignored the elderly woman stared at the floor. Even the manager looked like he might be sick. At the front of the room, the bank owner stood with his arms crossed. His mother sat quietly in the corner, her wrinkled hands folded in her lap. She hadn't asked for this drama, but she understood why her son had to do this. "Look around," the owner began, his voice cutting through the tense silence. "This isn't just about one rude comment. This is about the culture of this bank, my bank, that lets people think it's okay to treat customers like inconveniences." A junior teller near the back shifted uncomfortably. The air conditioning hummed too loud in the sudden quiet. Then the owner did something unexpected. He walked to the projector and pressed play. Security footage filled the screen, the same teller mocking a farmer for his dirty clothes last week. The manager rushing a young student out the door when her account was short 50 rupees. The security guard laughing as an elderly man struggled with the door. "These aren't just bad customer service moments," the owner continued, his voice growing thicker. "These are someone's mother. Someone's struggling father. People who trusted us with their life savings." The rude teller opened his mouth to speak, but the owner held up a hand. "No. Today you listen." He walked to his mother and helped her stand. Every eye followed them. "This woman you mocked yesterday? She worked night shifts at a hospital laundry to put me through business school. She saved every rupee so I could have this." He gestured around at the bank. "And she still refuses to let me give her special treatment because she believes in earning things fairly." His mother patted his arm, her eyes shining but her voice steady. "Beta, they just need to remember, banks run on trust. When that's gone, what are we?" A heavy silence fell. The manager looked like he wanted to disappear into the carpet. Then something remarkable happened. From the back of the room, the shy junior teller, the one everyone usually ignored, stood up. Her hands trembled but her voice didn't. "Sir, it's not just them. The whole system makes us rush people through. We get graded on speed, not kindness. The training never mentioned how to help elderly customers." The room held its breath, waiting for the owner to explode. Instead, he nodded slowly. "Thank you for speaking up. That changes things." The conference room buzzed with nervous energy as the junior teller's words hung in the air. The bank owner's stern expression softened slightly as he processed what she'd said. He turned to the manager. "Is this true? Are employees being evaluated only on transaction speed?" The manager shifted uncomfortably in his chair. "Well, corporate does track our efficiency metrics very closely. The faster we process customers, the better our branch scores." "That explains the symptoms, not the behavior," the owner interrupted. He walked to the whiteboard and uncapped a marker with a decisive snap. "Let me show you what real banking looks like." With quick strokes, he drew 2 columns, current system and better way. Under the first, he wrote, "Speed over service. Customers equals numbers. Fear-based management." The staff exchanged glances as the marker squeaked across the board. The rude teller, now slumped in his seat, couldn't meet anyone's eyes. Under better way, the owner wrote, "Dignity first. Teach, don't scold. Measure what matters." His mother nodded approvingly from her seat. The owner capped the marker and turned back to the group. "Starting today, we're changing how this branch operates. But..." He paused, looking directly at the rude teller. "That doesn't excuse what happened. You still need to take responsibility." The teller swallowed hard. I want to apologize. Really." He turned to the elderly woman, his voice cracking. "Auntie, I was wrong. The way I treated you." Before he could finish, the bank's front door chimed loudly. An agitated voice carried down the hallway, "I demand to speak to someone in charge." This is the third time this month. The owner raised an eyebrow at the manager, who hurried out. Moments later, he returned with a middle-aged shopkeeper waving a crumpled statement. "You see," the customer shouted, slamming the paper on the table. "More hidden charges. This bank steals from poor people." The staff froze. But to everyone's surprise, the owner's mother stood up slowly and walked toward the angry man. "Beta," she said gently, "let me see." The man blinked, startled by the kind-faced elderly woman. He handed her the statement. She studied it carefully, then pointed to a tiny footnote. "This fee happens when your balance goes below 5,000 rupees. My son," she caught herself. "The owner can fix this policy today." All eyes turned to the bank owner. The rude teller held his breath. The junior teller sat up straighter. Even the angry customer looked surprised. The owner smiled for the first time all day. "She's right. We're eliminating all minimum balance fees. For everyone." He turned to the manager. "And we're refunding every customer who was charged this month." The room erupted. The junior teller clapped her hands over her mouth. The angry customer's eyes widened. The rude teller looked like he'd been struck by lightning. But the owner wasn't done. He walked to his mother and took her hand. "And from now on, she'll be joining us twice a month, to teach all of you what real customer service looks like." The bank staff sat in stunned silence as the owner's words sank in. The junior teller was the first to move, rushing to the angry shopkeeper with a fresh application form. "Sir, let me help you switch to our new no-fee account right now." But the rude teller, now pale and sweating, just stared at his shoes. When he finally looked up, his eyes were red-rimmed. I didn't realize." His voice cracked. "My mother works as a cleaner. She gets charged those fees too." The owner's mother walked over and placed a gentle hand on his shoulder. "Then today, you'll call her and tell her the good news first." A murmur spread through the room. The security guard who'd ignored customers suddenly stood up straight. "I'll personally help every elderly person with that ATM from now on." Just as the mood began lifting, the manager's phone rang. His face drained of color as he read the caller ID. It's regional head office." The room froze. Corporate never called unless something was wrong. The owner took the phone and put it on speaker. A clipped, angry voice filled the room. "We've received multiple system alerts about unauthorized policy changes at your branch. Explain yourself immediately." Every employee held their breath. This was it, the moment their owner would either back down or lose everything. The owner didn't hesitate. "We're putting customers first. Starting with eliminating predatory fees." A long silence. Then, "You can't just." "Watch me," the owner said calmly. "And while we're at it, we're implementing respect training for all staff, starting with sessions led by my mother." The caller spluttered. "Your mother?" From her corner, the elderly woman spoke up in her clear, gentle voice. "Yes, Beta. The one your systems keep charging late fees when her pension arrives 2 days late." Dead silence on the line. Then the call disconnected abruptly. The junior teller gasped. "They'll fire everyone. They'll." The owner just smiled. "Let them try." He turned to his staff. "Who's with me?" To everyone's shock, the rude teller was first to stand. "Me." His voice shook but his eyes were clear. "I became what I hated most." One by one, chairs scraped back as every employee rose, even the terrified manager. The owner nodded. "Then let's get to work." First order of business, he tossed a set of keys to the security guard. "Disable that faulty ATM and set up a proper help desk. My mother will show you how." As the team sprang into action, the owner pulled out his phone and dialed a number. When it connected, he said just 4 words. Grandfather would be proud. The bank doors hadn't even opened for business the next morning when a crowd began gathering outside. Word had spread like wildfire through the small town. Something revolutionary was happening at the local branch. Inside, the staff moved with nervous energy. The once rude teller, whose name tag now read Vikram, adjusted his tie for the 10th time. What if corporate sends someone? What if? The owner's mother silenced him with a gentle pat on the arm. Beta, look. She pointed to the growing line outside. That's all that matters today. At exactly 9 a.m., the doors opened. But instead of the usual rush to counters, something remarkable happened. Elderly customers were greeted with chairs and chai. Students received patient explanations about accounts. The shopkeeper from yesterday stood near the entrance, proudly telling newcomers, "These people actually care." Then disaster struck. A black sedan screeched to a halt outside. 3 men in expensive suits marched in, corporate auditors carrying thick files. The murmuring crowd fell silent. "Branch takeover," the lead auditor announced, slapping papers on the counter. "Effective immediately. All staff to be re-interviewed. Every transaction from yesterday under review." Vikram's hands began shaking. The junior teller looked ready to cry. But the owner simply straightened his glasses and said, "On what grounds?" "Gross policy violations," the auditor snapped. Then, noticing the elderly woman watching calmly from her chair, he sneered, "And exploiting senior citizens for PR stunts." A gasp rippled through the crowd. The owner's mother stood slowly, her sari rustling in the tense silence. When she spoke, her voice carried decades of quiet strength. "Mr. Auditor, do you know who drafted our nation's first fair banking guidelines?" The auditor blinked. That was decades ago. Some retired. "My husband," she said simply. The room went absolutely still. Even the owner looked shocked. This was a family story never shared publicly. She reached into her worn purse and produced a faded photograph, a young man shaking hands with the Prime Minister, a document titled Banking Equality Act, clearly visible. The lead auditor's face turned ashen. That can't be." The owner stepped forward, eyes blazing. "You came to audit us? Fine. Let's start with why corporate ignored 27 customer complaints from this branch last quarter." He nodded to Vikram, who pulled up records on a tablet. Outside, a news van pulled up. Someone had tipped off the media. The auditors exchanged panicked looks. The crowd began murmuring angrily. And in the center of it all stood the elderly woman, her quiet dignity more powerful than any lawsuit. The bank had never been so silent. All eyes were locked on the faded photograph in the elderly woman's hand, the undeniable proof that banking reform ran in her blood. The lead auditor's mouth opened and closed like a fish out of water. Then, from the back of the crowd, an old man's voice quavered, "I remember that day. Your husband came to our village and explained banking rights to laborers like me. The dam broke." Customers began sharing stories, how the woman's late husband had fought for farmers' loans, for widows' accounts, for fair interest rates. The news camera outside zoomed in as the auditor slowly reached for the photograph with trembling hands. "Madam," he whispered, "we were taught his principles in training. But somewhere." His gaze fell on the terrified manager. "Somewhere we forgot." The owner stepped forward, his voice thick with emotion. "Then let's remember. Starting with reinstating every good policy my father created." He turned to the stunned staff. "With your help." Vikram suddenly pushed through the crowd, leading an elderly cleaning woman by the hand, his mother. Tears streamed down his face as he showed her the new no-fee account forms. The news camera captured it all. By noon, corporate headquarters issued an emergency statement: all branches would adopt the reforms immediately. The original manager resigned on the spot, but in a surprise twist, the junior teller was promoted to assistant manager. As the chaos settled, the owner found his mother sitting quietly in the corner, folding her now famous photograph back into her purse. "Ma," he knelt beside her, "why didn't you ever tell me how much Baba?" She cupped his face like she had when he was a boy. "Because Beta, true change must grow from your own heart, not someone else's legacy." Outside, customers kept arriving, not just for banking, but to touch the elderly woman's feet, to thank her family. The once dreaded bank had become something rare, a place of dignity. And when the new sign went up the following week, established by family name, continuing his vision, no one protested that the second line was in slightly larger letters. Because everyone understood now, the real foundation of any good bank wasn't money. It was heart.